This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on March the 18th, 1971. The interview is conducted by Mr. Pendleton Woods. The interviewees are Mr. and Mrs. Herb McSpadden. This interview took place on their farm near Chelsea, Oklahoma. This interview is being re-recorded on July the 22nd, 1985 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. This is March 18th, 1971. I'm on a farm near Chelsea, the home of Mr. Herb McSpadden, who is a longtime resident of this area, who is who for many years ran the Will Rogers Ranch, who is the nephew of Will Rogers and the father of Senator Clem McSpadden. And Mr. McSpadden has many reminiscences, and we'll talk about some about Will Rogers and some about his own personal experiences in the ranching area in here. Mr. McSpadden, to open up, I wonder if you might tell us where you were born and where you went to school.
Well, I was born in the edge of Chelsea on October 1st, 1893. That was in the Territory days. And went to school at Chelsea there for 3 or 4 years, and then we moved to California, went there one winter, and then came back another year in Chelsea, and then went to the old Cherokee Seminary. And was in the graduating class when it burned March the 20th, 1910.
Would you tell about that fire?
Sorry?
Would you tell about that fire?
Oh, yeah. Everybody, all the students at the seminary, the old male seminary, was a mile and a half south of Tahlequah. And everybody went to church on Sunday morning, the girls and boys both, whichever church they wanted to go to, the different denominations. And we were all at church when we got word that the seminary was on fire. That old school had fireplaces in all the upstairs bedrooms, and some boy that was sick that has burnt some papers in the flue, and it caught from the flue. And we all ran out there, of course, from foot, and they didn't have any fire departments then, and the thing was a total loss.
Did you all try to fight the fire out there?
No, it's too far gone, you see, by the time we got out there. It was...
Did it destroy the whole thing?
The whole thing. Everybody, all the students just had the clothes that they had on. That was all that was saved.
How many students were there in the school?
The last year, they had the girls over there. The Cherokee Nation had enough funds that they had kept on with these schools. That was 3 years after statehood, you see. And they had sold the female seminary to the present normal, to the state for the normal building. And they partitioned off, there was 2 parts of the old male seminary building, and they give the girls one part of it, and then the boys the other part. There was about 160 or 70 students there, I think, when it burned.
Who was your father? What name was?
Tom McSpadden.
Tom McSpadden.
Yes.
And he came from, where did he come from?
They come out here from Alabama. He and his father was 7 of the boys, and they came out here, come to Park Hill first. His father was a chaplain in the Confederate Army during the war between the states, and then he came out here as a missionary to the Cherokees.
Why did he come to Oklahoma?
Well, because so many of the Cherokees, you see, had come from northern Alabama and South Carolina, and that was, that was 30 years, you see, after the removal.
And he came, did your father have Indian blood?
No, the Indian blood comes
was
from...
a missionary family.
Yeah.
Your mother was Sally Rogers.
That's right.
We incidentally have her on tape from a disc that was made in
Sure
we
enough.
certainly do, made in 1939, and we placed a copy of it in the, we got it from an old disc that had been made by WKY in 1939, and we made a copy of it for the Will Rogers Memorial. So sometime when you're at the memorial, you might ask Ms. Love to play it for you, because it comes through real good. She talks about Cherokee heritage and about Cherokee education. It's a very, very good tape. Comes through real clear. What were your earliest reminiscences of Will Rogers?
Well, the first time he visited over home, it must have been about 1900. I was about 7 years old, and I started home with him, horseback, of course, and we got over west of here, out of my territory, and I got homesick, and I broke back on him. When they started this old Indian Territory group, when they dedicated the memorial, they had a group of old fellows that had actually ridden the range with Will Rogers, and I said, well, I was pretty young, but younger than he, but I did ride the range with him about 2 hours one morning, and then I broke back on him.
Tell about riding the range with him for those 2 hours.
Well, that was just going on the way from Chelsea to over to Will Rogers' place. It's about, of course, there wasn't many fences then, you know. You went pretty straight through, and it was about 16 miles over there.
Where was Will Rogers' ranch?
From here?
Yes.
It'd be about 8 or 10 miles due west, and then, about 10 miles west, and then about 2 miles south.
What is it now? What's on it now?
The distance, you mean?
No, what is there now?
Oh, the lake covered that up, you
It
see,
covered the
all
whole
of the
thing.
lowland, the best land.
Now, did you managed that ranch for a period of time, didn't you?
Yeah, it was, well, you see, the C.V. Rogers operated under open range conditions, you see. That was before the Cherokee Nation was even surveyed, and really he went by just sort of boundaries. What he called the ranch then, or his range rather, was everything between the Verdigris River and Caney. At one time he put in a drift fence from right through where the south edge of Talala is, to keep the cattle from drifting north, the ones from the drift south, you know, in those winter storms. And he put that fence in to keep his neighbor's cattle off of him.
When did you first meet Will Rogers?
Oh, I can't remember when. I just can't. It was pretty small, of course, but I evidently saw him the first time I was just a year or two old.
Was he already in show business when you first saw him?
No, he left. I well remember before he left, he left first and went to South America, if you remember. And then he came back, and Grandpa Rogers had a room right where the old Montgomery Ward building there at Clamworth, where the one they moved out of. And Uncle Will had bought an outfit, that is, saddle, a complete outfit, saddle and blanket, spurs, and I thought it was one of the prettiest saddles. That saddle was in that room when he came back from South America. That had been, I guess, the late summer of 1902 or maybe the spring of 1903.
Did you, South America, what all were you in contact with him, or did you hear much?
The letters that he wrote my aunt, Miss Lane, and my mother.
What were his experiences that you recall he wrote from South America?
Well, the main thing that I was always interested in the stock, and he, after he got this job at this Wild West show, well, he roped a zebra over there, and I think the zebra died, and he couldn't stand captivity. And then another thing, he went with a whole big herd of mules in South Africa somewhere and drove them to the shipping point, and then he, I think that was before he got the job with the show.
What induced him to go to South America as far as?
This country was fencing up, and those old boys, I can remember hearing them talk. It was a big open range country that this country had been, but was beginning to close up in the early part of 1900. And he thought his idea was, really, when he left here, was to go down there and establish a ranch in that new country. And he got down there and found conditions altogether different, and there was a little romance to the cowboy's life in this country, and they were just gentlemen horseback. And they got down there and they worked all natives, and I think the equivalent of their pay would be about $8 a month, and they eat beans and beef and work for about $8 a month. That would be in our money, and there was nothing to, he saw there was no future to just working on a ranch down there, and even then that country was well, it was big outfits, moneyed outfits, see, that had these operations with the cattle.
Do you think you had any interest in show business at that time? I mean, do you think you had, as far as had he indicated, as far as you all could see, any hankering to get into show business by that time?
Well, he was. In one way, he was a born showman, and now he was one of the first trick ropers that we folks in this country had ever seen, the one that was doing the tricks with the rope, you see, and he was a good natural roper and roped with the best at that time. And I remember I've heard these old boys talk at one time, that was back about 1902. They picked 5 Texas boys and 5 Oklahoma boys and had a match roping between those two, so that would show you how he was regarded as one of the top ropers then.
So he was a top roper before he was a
trick roper.
Before he was a trick roper.
Uh-huh.
Did you ever hear him talk about roping? I mean, in conversation from the standpoint of, I heard he had any remarks that he made about roping. Do you think was he interested in roping from the standpoint of, in addition to showmanship, actual practice? Did he do?
Oh yeah, yes he was, because I didn't see him. But then, after he got to, he was in the movies and got to making money. He always admired the Mexicans. They did a little different style roping. The rope was so much skill. And the American boys that try to do it fast, and they still can beat him in time, but then a loop would have to hit an animal just a certain way and at a certain place, and they'd have to handle the rope a certain way. And at one time in California, there was some noted roper down in Old Mexico that could make so many catches, That would be what's now the Charro Club, you see. That was, and he even hired that Mexican to come up and stay with him, and then just to teach him these different throws, like the head, the forefeet, and the hind feet, and different throws like that from different positions, and the way they if an animal is running or if he's standing, they could rope one just anyway.
How did he get into mixing the clowning with the roping? Or was he a natural clown from the beginning?
Well, I just know from these books, really, that I've written about him. He first started out with just a little act, and then he unconsciously just made some remark about rope or a trick or something that he'd missed, and everybody laughed, and the fellow told him, says, think of something else, and he just kept working up then from that.
When was the first time you saw him in a show?
I don't believe no, I never did see him in his real roping act. The only times I saw him would be when he'd come back here on those big benefits, you know, that he would
Did you tell about some of these benefits that you recall?
It was after the flood, wasn't it? 1925 in October.
1925.
That was for the
Was this a benefit for flood relief?
benefit.
The flood relief in Arkansas.
Yeah, the flood relief in Arkansas.
How do you remember that trip? I mean, what do you remember about that trip back? Can you think of anything, either of you?
Yes, he had all of his closest relatives come down to the Mayo Hotel was used at the time. And had them all go down there and had several suites rooms just for the family.
Let's talk about that.
And he was open the day before, so the next day was over.
Why don't you talk about that?
He kept, that was in the first time he was back here, he had the whole family down in Tulsa and engaged room for him, and all of his family, and he had a big family, and they were all there at Tulsa to see that show.
That was at the Mayo, is that right?
Yeah, that was at the Mayo. Then he had the singers. Was that the name? Yeah, the Domestic Singers.
Who were they?
It was a quartet, a very well-known quartet that he took with him on this trip, and I think he paid the expenses. Wasn't that the way that, I imagine he paid the expenses, but then he didn't pay them the salary that they could command back in with their act in that, but it was the whole thing. I forget how many, it run up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars that he, and we would hear more things while we was on the Rogers place. There was a little old fellow come by there in a little old Ford car that you wouldn't think could get to town, and he had some of the most impressive pictures of some place up in Wisconsin or Minnesota, and a boy's home, and he told us that, he said, it's not publicly known that Will Rogers made this possible. And he says, I just wanted to visit his old home. Oh, yeah, Tanbark Camp. Shagbark. I'll get right in a minute.
Shagbark Camp.
Uh-huh.
Can you think of any other stories or things that you heard on the Rogers Ranch? This is excellent, this experiences like that.
Well, I could... Oh, yeah, we moved over there. You see, while the ranch had been big in its operation at one time, before really, when it was the biggest was in 80s and 90s, and then the country began to settle up. There's more folks come in, and it is settling up all the time, and the railroad built through there, and the railroad settled the country. That was in Missouri Pacific, and it came right through I've heard old timers say that C.V. Rogers even fought the railroad coming through because it was coming right through his range, and he didn't, but he couldn't keep all that land to himself, the use of it. And so that when they allotted the country then, well, that cut them down to just, I think, 240 acres of land that they actually owned and had a deed to. Then they had bought up over 200 or 300 acres more, and the old place was awfully run down. And when I got out of the Army in 1919, he wrote my mother a letter and says, if Herb's home, says, tell him to go over and look at that old place. I think it's about to all fall down. I want him to help me fix it up. And so I began, that was in 1919, the fall of 1919. And we got started on this program. The thing is nearly brushed out, and I never saw a place in a worse state of repairs. And then we moved over. He'd come back, he is always back about once a year. And he'd come over and go over everything, get on a horse and ride around. And he wanted that old place to like it was when he was a boy. And of course, a lot of it had just brushed out, you know, overgrazing and overcropped what farmland there was. And then he got to buy an additional land, and just as it became for sale. And at the time they took over, well, he had, let me see, there was 1,610 acres of deeded land when at his death, and then we had a little leased land that went with it, of course. And but then we moved over there in 27, and then the dam run us out, and we moved back over here then in 61. This old place here, my mother was married in the west room of that old Rogers house in 1885. And Will Rogers' mother, his own mother, died when he was about 8 or 9 years old in 86 or 89. And he came here and stayed here in this place. And there was a little Cherokee school, Drumgould, about 2.5 miles over here, a little log school, and he stayed here with my mother, and this was his first year of schooling.
Your mother was married in this house?
No, in the Rogers house, and came here to go to housekeeping, though.
Oh, I see. So, in this house here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been worked over, of course, but...
so Will Rogers actually was actually here for...
Yeah, 1 year, one school year.
1 year.
Yeah. Yeah, this old house here was built in 1883.
Who built this house?
My father.
I see. And so he and your mother, who was out of Rochester,
Mm-hmm.
were here.
Yeah.
That's right. I believe that Ms. Lane told us that he lived with his sister the year after his mother died.
Mm-hmm.
Are any of the furniture or appurtenances a part of what he had then, or is it?
No, we haven't been able to locate any of the old that is in the old Rogers house.
Were you living, when you were on the ranch, were you living here or there? Were you living?
Well, we moved, I was looking after it from here before,
here?
yeah, from 1919 to 27, you see.
Then you lived over there?
Oh.
Was someone living here then?
Well, I was batching here.
Oh, you were, okay.
Yeah. Well, I was batching here before, while I was looking after the Rogers place first from 1927. Yeah. Yeah.
This house been here a long time?
Uh-huh. Yeah, this house built the year the Frisco Railroad come through the Cherokee Nation.
Why don't you tell me something about your mother? I know she was prominent in Cherokee education and such, and in this tape that we have of your mother about that. Why don't you tell a little about your mother?
Well, graduated the old Cherokee Female Seminary in 1880, I believe. And then she taught at the Cherokee Orphan Asylum for a year or two. And then she and Dad were married in 85.
Did she, was she active in education after that, at any time after her marriage?
Well, just to keep us see that we all went to school
You all went to school. That was
and made a passing grade.
How many children were there?
Of the McSpadden family,
yes.
There was 3 boys and 4 girls.
3 boys and 4 girls.
Uh-huh.
And of those, are there 3 of you left? Or how many are left?
The 4 girls and I.
The 4 girls.
The 2 brothers.
Yes. Can you think of any other trips that Will Rogers made, or any other experiences or things that he might have done when he was back that might be interesting, worth mentioning? Funny things that happened, or anything to give you a sideline?
Oh, there was always somebody after him, the Chamber of Commerce or something, and he'd phone mother and or send her a wire, and then he'd always want to come over to the old place, and he loved to rope so, and we always kept a bunch of goats, and mostly for clearing the land, following up a clearing, and he liked to rope goats, liked to rope anything really that'd run, but he'd say, get a hold of Herb, and we didn't have a phone at that place over there, and they'd say, get a hold of Herb and tell him to have the goats up. I'd like to rope some goats when he come, but then there was always somebody, there'd be side trips and things. One of the funniest things that I remember, just to show you his wit and his quick wit, and he had us going over to the Frank Phillips place over there at Willow Rock, and he knew both of those brothers. That was before Mr. Wadey died, and we were going around in the car looking over that place. There's 4,000 acres in that place, all very highly improved. And they were talking about something about old politics, something that happened back east or some big political question. And passing old water buffalo out there, had a big fence around him, and he was out in this water and had raised his head up, and one of them says, look here, Will, here's a water buffalo. And he turned his head and looked at him and said, yeah, what do you feed him, hay or fish? His wit was just spontaneous, but really in fixing up an old place, he told a story about these old places. Oh gosh, the cost of it all was even exorbitant then, seemed like. And he come back, and when he'd come back, he knew all the old families in the Cherokee Nation. And he said, when I come back, and I was in this group with him, he says, we'll come back and hear that some of the old-timers have passed on. And he says, then the rest of us will ask, well, who got the old place? Who got the old place? And he says, I've had Herbie over on my place, says we've been fixing it up here for 2 or 3 years now, and I'm beginning to think that the one that got the old place is stuck. And everything was costing so much. He never took a dime off the place itself, and even sent money back here all the time to, we didn't have all these modern things to do with then, like clearing. He wanted so much of that, a lot of that timber cleared out, and that was all done with just a double-bitted axe and a cross-cut saw, just manual labor. And he didn't, that work's all done by big bulldozers now. In fact, they cleared that bottom out for the lake.
You know, the motto, of course, that goes with Will Rogers is, I never knew a man I didn't like, and this I've always understood is not just a motto with him, but that it was the way he lived. Do you want to? Can you think of anything that might get some insight or thoughts on that?
No, only it was very true, and he.
Tell about the Christmas. He would write the letters and send the money back for us to get things for everyone on the place, the whole family, the children.
Oh yeah, there was 3 or 4 families that lived in that bottom. You know, that class of people before all this maid work started. Sort of followed the rivers, you know. They could pretty near make a living on, get in some old shack and hole up in that, and with the hunting and trapping and what they could pick up, or they could sort of get by. And he made a lot of work for them then on this clearing. And one winter, that was in the Depression, along in the 30s, that he wrote back here and told my wife to wanted to see that every one of those families had a nice Christmas, and to buy a little red wagon for the little children. And
Turkey.
yeah, turkey too. Turkey and a little red wagon, and he wanted them all to have a nice Christmas, and they did too.
Well, the funny thing is they found out about us ahead of time, and they didn't want a turkey. They wanted Herb to butcher a goat. So we just spent more money on groceries.
You know, I think I'll spend a few minutes talking with you, Ms. McSpadden, if you'll move
Yeah.
move up here. I think that...
She remembers.
Yes, come on up here. We want to get you on, too.
The night.
Ms. McSpadden, I wonder if you might give us, in your thoughts, a few of your reminiscences that you might think of on the Rogers Ranch. You have added some as we went along with Mr. McSpadden, but I wonder if you might comment on any of the events that might have occurred, particularly when Will Rogers was back on the ranch, when he came back to visit.
Oh, there were so many things. There were so many things that did happen when he would come. It seemed like all the hired help on the place would be close by. And before he would leave, he would slip around and give each one of them $10 or $20 bill, which in those days was quite a bit of money. And these Christmas things didn't just happen once. It happened several years. And that's when he would send the $100 back to me. And, of course, $100 would buy a lot of gifts and clothes and groceries for people like that. But I think one of the things that will always stand out in our memories more than anything is the fact that we had the privilege of living in a place like that. And our boys, our little sons, grew up knowing the kind of a man this great uncle was. Living in a place like that. And our boys, our little sons, grew up knowing the kind of a man this great uncle was. He was an inspiration to them. And I think they always, way back in their minds, they would just feel that they couldn't do certain things because that wasn't in the Will Rogers way of doing things. And I think that's why they turned out to be very honest young men.
Clem, Senator McSpadden, is quite a showman himself, actually. I know that he, anyone who has seen the National Finals Rodeo knows the kind of a showman that he is. And and has, of course, had a great interest in rodeo and is now president of the RCA, Rodeo Cowboys Association. When did he begin to develop his interest in rodeo?
Well, Herb and I often laugh about that because he gets that entirely from the McSpadden family. There weren't any showmen in my family at all in any way. We were a shyer group of people, and I think he gets it straight from his father, too, because Herb doesn't act like he's a showman, but when he used to be working his cattle or when he was rodeoing, why, he was a showman just as much as any of the other cowboys were. But we always said before Clem was born, there's one thing that we weren't going to let our children do. We weren't going to teach them their little pieces to stand up and say before people, and we weren't going to let them perform on the piano or anything like that. We were going to keep them in the background. We weren't going to impose their talents on people. And you know, when that boy came, he wasn't over a year old till we knew that he was a showman throughout. We had nothing to do with it. And by the time he was 4, he knew all the cowboy songs that Herb knew and could sing them. And that was one thing that his Uncle Will enjoyed so much when he came, was having Clem stand up with his little short suits on and cowboy boots and sing those cowboy songs. And I think all through life, Clem showed that streak. He never intended to do anything with it. He didn't intend to ever be an announcer. And he was sort of pushed into politics. He didn't do that. Just some friends decided they wanted him to run against somebody, the other somebody they didn't want. And he hadn't had any idea of doing a thing like that at the time. He was just out of the Navy, you see, and had been married only a couple of years. And I think getting into politics and then announcing just brought out all that showmanship that was in him. Because the second boy has it, but he's a little bit more conservative with it. And the third boy has it, and but he holds back. They don't do anything like Clem does, and the boys don't want to be alike. But I think it all comes from Herb's family, the Rogers, not the McSpaddens, but the Rogers. And Herb's own mother, Sally McSpadden, was, well, I've heard my father say that if Sally McSpadden and her sister, Maud Lane, had ever gone on the stage, they would have been bigger hits than their brother, because they were just wits from the start. And she was one of the most remarkable women I've ever known in my life.
Can you tell me something about her?
Oh, I could tell you a lot of things about her, because in later years, after Herb's father died, she would come over with her little granddaughter after school was out and spend several days with us over there. She told us so many things about the old place and the people who used to visit there. Of course, her memory would be sharpened by being in those surroundings. And I think those times that she visited us brought us closer together as a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law than if she never had come, because she was so happy to be over in that old place again. And I can't recall the things that she told us because it's been so long ago, but she gave us an insight to the character of the people living there, and how her mother and the children would be sitting on the porch in the summertime when she was just a young girl, and her father would be down at was that council in Tahlequah, and they would hear wagon wheels or the horses coming down the lane, and Mrs. Rogers would send word by one of the Indian girls working to start the fire in the kitchen stove. It'd be late in the evening. They'd had early dinner, you see, or supper they called it, and they would start in to get a meal, because they knew that whoever was coming down that road was coming for a meal and to stay all night. and there was never any hesitancy. They always had a place for them and had plenty of food for them. And I said, where in the world did you put them to sleep? And she laughed. She said, oh, honey, on pallets. We'd pull a feather mattress off one of the beds and put the older people on that. And the children, of course, in those days slept on pallets, much as they did beds, right on the floor.
Did you rodeo, Mr. McSpadden?
Well, yeah, I went every place but the pay women.
But the payment.
I didn't want to.
You worked in, did you professional rodeo?
No, just one of the early days, you know. But
Yes.
it was just ranch boys and ranch horses, really. But
Were you associated with any of the known rodeo riders, early day rodeo riders, or rodeo cowboys?
oh yeah, like the ones in the 20s and the 30s.
Yes. Why don't you tell me the early rodeo people that the best known of the early rodeo people that you rodeoed with in your early days?
Well, the ones that's the best known and the boys that would win would be the Weir boys and Fred Lowry and Fred Beeson and Bob Crosby, of course, and his brother Hal, and that bunch come on a little later, and Jake McClure, and but I didn't get out of the country. I didn't go, just the ones you could go to horseback, and you're sure getting home then if you...
Can you think of any stories about any of these, say Bob Crosby or any of the others?
Yeah, the first, these rodeos now are so different when, with regards to timing and everything, and they used to just build a pen just out on the prairie in the pasture somewhere, and no outside fences or anything, and they'd just turn one loose and give a steer a 30-foot start. Two fellows horseback would run him over the line, and then the men come out behind them to rope him. And but earlier than that, they did have one in Uncle Will's time that, and he went to them now. That is at San Antonio and Springfield, Missouri. That was in '99, and Memphis, and at Memphis. Jim Hopkins tied as another fellow told me later, that there's roping wild cows off this MK Ranch. That's the Kennedy Ranch in South Texas. And he tied one in 18 seconds, and riding a horse of Will Rogers. And that was the fastest animal, I think, that had been tied in what they called an regular steer roping. And at that time, and Mr. Heber Skinner tied a steer at Springfield, Missouri in '99 in 34 seconds. And Will Rogers was always sort of a clown, and he had a verse made up about all these ropers for the ones that they'd go to. And he said, Heber tied a steer in around 34. He can rope all his life, never do it anymore. Hi-yi, yippee-yippee-yay. And then he had a verse on, somebody at Claremore, roping at Pryor, I think. And I think that is a Texas fellow named Glasscock working for Rucker. And he said he went out at Pryor on the Crack Rock Black. He missed 2 loops, and the hollered come back on the hi-yi, yippee-yippee-yay. That's about the only 2 verses that I remember these old boys telling about him. But now this thing has got so, it's so commercialized and professional now, it's just, it's just a profession. They're lowering records every year, riding better horses and making faster times. And I do think one thing, though, that there isn't a lot of cattle. It's the people that pay admission, of course, that makes these rodeos possible, and they've got to have an act that will, they don't want to see a steer and take too much advantage of a man. And I was a jury when Jack Smith, when the steer killed him, a big steer, run a horn through him, and he died. Jack was one of those working at that time for the 101. And things like that, folks don't like to see it. They don't like. They just want to see a show. It's just not good showmanship to have the cattle two rank, and now they're trying to outlaw it, even on account of the
Cruelty down.
yeah.
Who was the best rider you ever saw?
Best rider?
Rider. Yes, bareback rider or...
Oh, the best rider.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. There was a bunch of those old boys at that time. Mostly all the good riders came really from the Northwest earlier, and the Southern boys would beat them roping, but that's all changed now. I've seen some awful good rides, just ranch rides, but they wouldn't know what we thought was good rides. But then those same boys wouldn't, under the rules now, well, they wouldn't make the grade. That is, wouldn't be in the winning bunch.
We're supposed to be back in Claremore at 7:30 for this Historical Society meeting, so I guess we'll have to move along.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful. Really, it's a wonderful. This has been an interview with Mr. and Mrs. Herb McSpadden on the McSpadden farm near Chelsea.